There's a tremendous amount of resources and time and energy and people power going in right now to creating truly immersive virtual reality technologies. And the goal and the aim of those technologies is to create something in a digital world which is indistinguishable from actual reality. And what's so interesting about this to me is that from a contemplative or meditative point of view, it could be said that this biological experience, the one we're already having, is already the best reality-making apparatus in existence, at least as far as we know. It's the gold standard by which these virtual reality technologists are measuring the success of their technology. And what's interesting is the word virtual actually means as close to something that's real without being fully real. So in a sense, they're trying to recreate this immersive reality in a virtual, digitally programmed environment. Now, there's a lot that could be said and explored there, and that's very interesting. But what I want to kind of touch on here is exploring the question and looking at why is it that our experience seems to be so immersive? What is it that makes this so immersive? Why do we get immersed in our experience to the point where we don't even question its validity? I think one of the reasons is that we're having this multi-sensory experience. We have all these different ways of sensing the world: seeing, hearing, touching, feeling in the body, different ways of sensing temperature and pain and movement, tasting and smelling, eating. All of these senses connect us to and engage us with the world in a way where we feel like we're in it. We feel like we're immersed in it. Now, scientifically, right, we know that there's a huge range of information that we're not tuned into in terms of our senses. But in terms of our first-person experience, it feels like we really know the world around us, right? And we're getting all this different data that's coming together. And not only are we getting these different sensory inputs, but we also are emotionally engaged with the world. We feel certain ways about what's happening. We feel angry, we feel sad, we have this complex limbic system and brain structures that let us sort of feel our way through the meaning of this. Another reason it's so immersive is because not only are we sensing and feeling, but we're also thinking. We're able to internally represent the world to ourselves through the senses and through our emotional experience. We can imagine seeing things or hearing things. We imagine this voice in our head, our own voice talking to us. We imagine ourselves. We imagine other people. We rehearse scenarios. We can plan into the future. We, in a sense, are constantly storing reality. This reality is made of stories. It's made of complex thoughts and emotions and sensations that all come together and are all represented to us in our own minds as models, as frameworks, as ways of understanding reality conceptually that helps us predict and navigate through it. And all of these things are woven together in this sort of vivid tapestry of our own sensory experience. And that helps give rise to what I guess you could say is one of the most central stories of our lives. It's the story of a self, of a reference point to whom or to which all of this experience refers or comes back to. We are the main character in the story of our lives. We're the protagonist, and we're also oftentimes the antagonist. We play all these different roles. We have, in a psychological sense, all these different sub-personalities within us. And this complex self, which is actually made of many selves, there is a kind of consistent way in which we do refer back to ourselves as being the one to whom this is happening. And that's a powerful and consistent story that occurs in our lives. If you don't have a self, you're either 1 year old, or there's something wrong with you in this world. And not to get too dramatic about it, but it's the case too that there's not just this one self. There's also all these other selves. There's all these other people out there as well, who are kind of slightly mysterious and unpredictable. We can't totally know what they're going to do. I mean, we can't really totally know what we're going to do. But for other people, it's even harder to know. And so here again, we have to rely on our models and our thoughts and our kind of deductions about what people are like. We have to develop social intelligence to be able to move through the world and work with these different others. Sometimes we can't stand them, we get annoyed by them, sometimes we fall in love with them, we live with them, we rely on them, we need them, they need us. We are humans only in relationship with other humans. We can't exist independently from each other, and yet we can't fully know each other either. And one of the amazing capacities of human beings is to imagine common realities, to imagine realities together. This is a quote from Yuval Noah Harari, the historian. In his book Sapiens, he says, "There are no gods in the universe, no nations, no money, no human rights, no laws, and no justice outside the common imagination of human beings." And so, in a sense, in a very real sense, we human beings together imagine the world that we live in. We co-construct, we co-design these realities together, not always consciously or intentionally. Often they're inherited. And so we end up living in a world that is a world both of our own making, in terms of how we understand it, the meaning that it has. And it's also a world that's outside of our influence. There's much that we can't control. It's a world where challenge is a basic component of living, where there is a constant attempt to survive, to thrive, to grow, to protect ourselves and those we care about. There's in-groups and out-groups. There's complex power dynamics. There's governance. There's different nations dealing with each other. There's so much complexity in this world of stories and this physical world that we live in. So part of what makes our experience of reality so immersive is that our first person, our subjective experience, is so total and consistent. It includes so much information. It's got so many elements that work together to construct this very rich sense of being alive and of having a self to whom this refers to, having a story, a history, a past, a present, a future, and being in relationship with others who are on some similar journeys, who together we form communities and cultures, and whom together we create systems in the world that have lasting impact on the world around us and on future generations of humans. So it's incredibly immersive because it feels so real and it's reinforced so strongly those realities, those stories. There's a phrase that was used to describe in the 18th century, in particular written stories, but it's come to be relevant to television and to video games as well, and that's the suspension of disbelief. And when you're in a kind of media experience, reading a story, a fiction work, for instance, or watching a television series, or playing a rich video game, an immersive game, there's a way in which we are able to suspend our disbelief about the trueness of those stories, the trueness of those realities. And by doing that, we become immersed in them. We become engaged in the stories in new ways. and we're able to enjoy them. They're entertainment. Another way that that suspension of disbelief comes online and is part of how we can become immersed is that every single night when we go to sleep, we experience the original virtual reality, which is dreaming. We actually have these regular experiences of becoming someone totally different, different body, different experience. You know, this dream body, it may look like a fantastical animal, or it might look like us, or we might be kind of outside of it looking from way back here. And yet, for the vast majority of us, when we dream and when we remember that we've dreamt, we're able to immerse ourselves in the story of the dream. The dream feels real. It feels like who we are. It feels like what's actually happening while it's happening. That's why it can be so startling to wake up from a really vivid dream and go, wait, where am I? What's going on? Who am I? Have you ever had that experience where you wake up from a dream and you sort of suddenly wonder, who are you and what was just happening? In the dream, there's also that suspension of disbelief occurring. And I would propose that that same human function, that capacity that we have to overlook the cracks and overlook the imperfections and overlook the suspicion that this might not be all of what is, applies to our normal waking life as well. It, in a sense, is like a spell that we cast on ourselves, where we overlook the gaps and just see a consistent, coherent movie picture that is our own full life. But sometimes this immersive spell breaks. Sometimes this reality reveals itself to be not quite as total and complete or consistent as we imagined. This can often happen, for instance, when we have an illness or someone near us becomes quite sick, perhaps even near death, or for sure when someone that we know dies. I remember running across the street several years ago here in Asheville, and all of a sudden this truck just whizzed by my face, and it was going quite fast. I had no clue it was even there until it was right in front of me. My sandal actually came flying off my foot as I stopped, and it got run over by the truck. And in that moment, you know, there was a flash of, whoa, I almost died. What just happened? My body reacted. There's all the adrenaline. Got across the street. And what was so interesting, though, about that experience is that within a couple minutes after it happened, my mind, like almost in a shameless way, was just like, what's for lunch? And I noticed the thought, you know, because I've been meditating and practicing for quite a while. I noticed that thought, and I noticed that just the gravity of wanting to like go back to what was normal and familiar and kind of just let go of or overlook what had just happened and how serious that could have been, how that could have just been lights out. And so it's so powerful, this tendency to want to believe that we're immortal in a sense, or that, you know, this will always be happening, or that this is totally real, that we're even able to overlook within a few minutes of a near-death experience that anything is out of the ordinary. It's amazing. But these experiences do, for many people, at least in a short flash, pull the curtain up and show us what's behind. We see how the spell is being constructed. This can also happen if you take drugs that alter your perception, like a drug high, psychedelic experience, having sex, and really having a powerful experience. Any sort of altered state experience can also do this, though it doesn't necessarily, because it gives us an altered perspective, a different way of experiencing our life. It shows us something that we normally don't see. One of the most common ways that this immersive reality can become questioned is when the dream of our experience, the dream of our existence, if we imagine this is like a dream, becomes a nightmare. When we're really suffering, when we're really in pain, that can break the spell of immersion, because we can begin to question the nature of our actual reality. How can reality really be this bad? That doesn't make sense. How can God be this terrible to punish me? How can, if that's your background or belief, how can it be this unforgiving and this sometimes horrifying? Suffering is one of the main ways that people start to question their own experience and can get onto a kind of contemplative journey. And once that happens, once we begin to pull one of the different threads of this tapestry of immersive experience, it can begin, though slowly often, to unravel the entire illusion. And I don't mean illusion in the sense of it's not real. I mean illusion in the sense of a mirage, where these different elements, the multisensory experience, the emotional engagement, the thoughtfulness, the self engaging with other selves in this world, that all of those coming together create a sense that this is consistent and real in a total way. But if we break the mirage and we see that there are merely these different elements coming together temporarily, being constructed, and then eventually will be deconstructed, then it changes our relationship to life itself, to our experience of reality. It invites us out of the immersion, out of the immersive experience, to notice it and see it in a new light. That can be exhilarating, that can be scary, that can be terrifying. It actually can lead, to some people, it leads to a break in their experience of reality that is, we would call it madness. The positive version of this madness is to wake up to what's actually happening, to see more clearly how our reality is constructed, to not simply be immersed in actual reality, but to also be able to know it from another vantage point, or from many different vantage points, to become not just programmed by our experience, but programmers of it, to be free within it, while also being totally engaged in the story of our lives.